punishing a lover for destroying his daughter's marriage. Roger had never felt so alone in his life. Yes, he celebrated Christmas with his family, but he was alone. His parents had each other. His 3 siblings had spouses and children of their own. But for the first time in 12 years, Roger was alone. He had divorced his wife of 11 years just 2 months earlier. And now, during a season that was always about family, he was alone. God bless his mother, his 2 sisters, and his brother. They tried their best to make Roger feel loved and included. Everyone in the house knew except his father. Emotionalism wasn't his thing. He tried to remain nonchalant, clapping Roger on the shoulder as his only show of emotion. Roger knew it was his best version of fatherly love. It was just as effective as what the rest of the family was trying to do. You really can be alone in a crowd, Roger thought to himself. The family opened many presents under the Christmas tree. Everyone oohed and awed, laughed and teased each other as only a family can do. Roger tried his best to pretend to enjoy it. He didn't want to spoil it for anyone, especially his 7 nieces and nephews. Christmas is especially for children. Uncle Roger wasn't going to be part of the fun. Roger couldn't help but think about the one gift that wasn't under the tree, a 125-carat gold diamond necklace. It wasn't under the tree because it wasn't going to be given. About a month after Christmas in January, he received a large sum of money for the necklace. It was for his then-wife, Tracy, who was the love of his life in January. It wasn't until February that he found out she had been cheating on him for 6 months, and 2 weeks later hit her with divorce papers. At that point, he thought about turning the necklace back in for a full refund, but he just couldn't even dare to look at it. Roger loved this woman with all his heart, with all his soul, and was absolutely certain that they were together for the long haul. He guessed that there really are none so blind as those who can't see. Roger had noticed that the couple's sex life had slowed down about 6 months before, but he told himself that was because he and Tracy had been married for 10 years, and that was normal. What he hadn't noticed until further reflection was the secretive way she read her messages and never parted with her phone. He trusted her completely and never, ever thought she would betray his trust. Of course, even in his wildest dreams, Roger never expected someone outside of his family to spell his last name correctly. And when it happened, he just had to stop and talk to the person who had just done the impossible. One Thursday around lunchtime, a Tier 1 supplier dropped by unannounced, and Roger decided to impress him with a great lunch. Roger took him to the best barbecue place in town. On the other side of town, about 35 minutes away. Roger had probably only eaten there 3 times in the last 11 years, but John Steiner deserved better. When it came time to pay, Roger put his credit card on the bill, and when the waitress returned, she thanked him by name, right. Like many Polish names, the spelling of the name has nothing to do with the pronunciation. So when she pronounced Zikwakrat as Zikit, Roger nearly fell off his chair. He and John looked at each other in shock. "How do you know how to pronounce it?" he asked the waitress, who seemed to be of Asian descent. "You don't look Polish at all. When you see that name 2 days in a row, you immediately remember," she laughed. "Apparently, I was serving a couple of your relatives at lunch yesterday, and I just had to ask how to pronounce the name. Is Tracy Zikwakrat a relative? I didn't hear her husband's name, although the man is ha ha ha." They were a pretty cute couple. John realized that the waitress was referring to Roger's wife, and Roger blushed like a stoplight, but held back. "Yes, she's family," he said. "She and her handsome husband get a bit carried away sometimes, don't they? I'll put it this way. Sometimes I felt like I was interrupting a couple of horny teenagers. I hope to look as good as this woman when I'm in my 30s. Tracy was actually 37, but with a tight body and an abundance of curves, along with flawless porcelain skin and long dark brown hair, she could pass for late 20s. Roger guessed that the GING Mr. Zixwicrat was actually Joey Brilliant, a salesman with a lush mop of hair. Tracy had been working at the same insurance agency and administration since about the time she and Roger had gotten married. Joey Brilliant had shown up at the office about a year ago, and Roger had heard from him almost every night after work for about 6 months. And then Tracy had suddenly stopped talking about him, as if he didn't exist at all. Perhaps another clue that Roger, Mr. Trusty, had missed. John and Roger drove to the office very quietly. Roger, wasting no time, hired a private investigator. Within 2 weeks, the investigator had obtained evidence, including a videotape of the lovers having sex in Tracy and Roger's bed on Wednesday morning, an hour after Roger left for work. The investigator had warned Roger that the video was crude, but Roger, of course, was not even remotely prepared for such disrespect. "That cheating bitch," Roger shouted into his computer screen as he watched the proceedings in the privacy of his office after hours. Roger didn't hesitate to have his attorney draw up the divorce papers. A week later, Tracy was served at work. After watching the video of his wife and lover performing in his marital bed, Roger had no problem embarrassing Tracy in front of her coworkers. Roger got home early in the evening when Tracy drove the car into the garage. She practically ran into the house and started yelling at her husband. "What are you doing embarrassing me in front of my friends and coworkers? And my boss, for God's sake," she shrieked. Roger sat leaning back in his chair and sipped his Lizette Boy bourbon, the bottle resting on the table next to his chair. He calmly finished his sip and set the shot glass down. "Because I wanted you to feel just a little bit of what I felt when I watched you and Joey Brilliant make love in our marital bed, you fool. At least you could have told me our marriage was over. You didn't have to desecrate our marital bed. And don't you think I at least deserve some sort of apology?" Roger filled his shot glass again, and Tracy stared at him. It had just occurred to her to wonder how long Roger had known and how he knew. "At least be so kind as to tell me what I did wrong, and how long it's been going on," he said. "And is this guy the only one you make love to?" "You don't have to be so rude, Roger," Tracy snorted. "We've been having sex for about 6 months now, and Joey's the only one. It just happened. You didn't do anything wrong, it just happened." Tracy's eyes filled with tears. "Why is she crying?" Roger thought to himself. "She's the one who cheated, and I'm the one who was cheated." Tracy stared at her husband with her mouth open as he poured himself another drink and sipped it quietly. Somehow it never occurred to her that her husband would find out about her affair, and even if he did, how he would react. It suddenly occurred to her that she had been terribly cavalier in taking advantage of her husband's affection. Roger's family had been as devastated as he himself had been when they learned of Tracy's betrayal. After all, they had been married for 11 years and almost seemed like the perfect couple. The only thing missing from that perfect marriage was children. Although the couple decided to have 2 children when they were first planning their lives, Tracy kept putting off starting a family, until one day Roger asked her if she was breaking their agreement. Tracy tearfully admitted that she was, and no amount of arguing from Roger could make her change her mind. It was a tense few months for the couple, until Roger finally told Tracy that he would let her do things her way. Mary Houston looked sadly at her husband. Last Christmas, with its warmth and cheer, seemed so far away, she thought. This Christmas, with the recent divorce of oldest daughter Tracy, seemed almost ghostly. Yes, the house was full of their second daughter's family of 6, but Tracy without Roger seemed to be walking around in a bad dream. Plus, Roger was always the soul of the party when families got together. Although he and Tracy had no children, he loved his 4 nieces and nephews and was always supportive. For their part, Mary and George Houston simply adored their former son-in-law. And Tracy's feeble attempts to explain why their marriage had broken up never seemed adequate enough. Roger told his relatives that the decision to divorce belonged to Tracy, and he would not discuss it any further. Tracy felt the tension of the whole family as they spent the few days before and after Christmas together. She thought that being with the family would help her overcome the malaise she felt inside, but it turned out that being around the family had the opposite effect. Everyone seemed to be waiting for a better explanation as to why she and Roger had divorced. And it seemed her sister's children blamed her specifically for Uncle Roger not being around. The Hussons hadn't invited Joey to family Christmas, and Tracy hadn't fought for him to attend. She would miss his lean, muscular body next to her in bed at night, but she wouldn't have to deal with the awkwardness of him being an outsider. Realizing that it had only been 2 months since the divorce was official, Joey hadn't been particularly resistant when Tracy told him she was going to her parents' house for the vacations without him. Tracy was stunned when she was served divorce papers at her place of employment one afternoon in late February. She had no idea that Roger knew about her affair. She had been so consumed with her personal life that she was terribly embarrassed when she was served, and she was pretty sure she caught Joey's smirk in the background. She drove home furious, but that anger was replaced by confusion when she ran into Roger. He was quiet and calm and seemed more interested in his bourbon than arguing with her. Besides, she knew she really didn't have any good answers to his questions. He seemed to know a lot about the case, including the fact that he and Joey had a date right in the bedroom. When Roger mentioned that, she even thought it sounded tasteless. She told Roger the truth, that she didn't want it to happen. Virtually every woman in the office swooned when Joey joined the staff. His looks and charm quickly won over most of them. Tracy noted that the young man was very skilled at flirting and seemed to be very good at the seduction game. She didn't seem too bothered when Joey started chatting her up, assuming that she was immune to Joey's advances since she was completely in love with her husband. A casual lunch turned into a casual dinner, as Tracy told her husband several times that she had to work late. She admitted to herself that she enjoyed Joey's company, and the man was certainly handsome. At the 5th dinner, the couple ended up in a hotel room, and Tracy hesitated for only a minute before she found herself under Joey. Tracy knew this wouldn't be the only time for the two of them. Tracy was somewhat surprised that she wasn't overwhelmed with guilt as the two of them washed and dressed. Physically, she felt great and wasn't too worried about her husband. Completely satisfied with her young stud, Tracy refused to have sex with Roger. Joey's youthful enthusiasm, his general strength and stamina combined with the illicit nature of what they were doing, kept Tracy hot and ready to go as long as the young man wanted. Then the two of them hugged and talked and laughed. It may not have been intentional, but the longer they were together, the closer Tracy became to Joey. Because Roger always trusted Tracy and gave her space, she didn't feel pressured in her relationship with Joey. The two were never publicly frank about their relationship and were always careful with their dating, except when they occasionally used Tracy's marital bed at Joey's request. The young men found it fascinating to have sex with Tracy in her marital bed, and confident that they wouldn't be caught, Tracy had to admit that she found it fascinating too. Once Tracy got used to being serviced, she and Joey began to spend more time together, and not just in sex. She found peace and security in his strong arms, just as she had once found in Roger's arms. She was surprised at how easy it turned out to be to forget her husband. Joey brilliant missed Tracy when she went to her parents' house for Christmas. The couple began their romance over a year ago and grew closer when Tracy's husband, Roger, filed for divorce in February. The divorce became official in October, and Joey and Tracy considered moving in together. They talked about having Joey accompany Tracy to her parents' house, but Tracy made the decision to go to her parents' house alone after her mother told her that her lover wasn't invited or welcome. Joey was actually fine with that because he wanted to spend some time partying with his friends, and that probably wasn't going to happen with Tracy around. To be honest with himself, Joey hadn't planned on being with Tracy for that long, but she was a beautiful woman and a damn good lovemaker. When he'd first pursued her at work, he'd known she was married, but it had never bothered him before. He'd seduced a few married women, he just hadn't planned anything long-term. That plan changed when Tracy's apparently clueless husband stopped being clueless after about 6 months and filed for divorce. Joey couldn't believe that Roger had basically just abandoned his wife without putting up a fight. Joey had no way of knowing whether Roger was stupid or cowardly, and discussing the matter with Tracy didn't bring him any closer to an answer. The girls were in full swing, and on the night before Christmas Eve, the party was good. Joey left his friends around 1 o'clock in the morning, accompanied by a pretty blonde who had been drinking with Joey and his friends for hours. "This guy is so good-looking that women just can't keep their eyes off him," one of Joe's friends told another. "I bet that girl is half his normal age." The man grinned. It had been almost 5 years since Roger had last seen Mary Hewson. He had always liked Mary and George. They had been very kind to him over the years, and had nothing to do with what their daughter had done. Roger still sent birthday and Christmas cards. When Roger walked into the Italian restaurant, Mary was already seated at a table. Although she and George lived an hour south, she had asked Roger to meet her at one of his favorite restaurants near the apartment he had moved into after the divorce. At the thought of divorce, Mary's eyes moistened. Roger was a great guy, and even now she couldn't understand what Tracy had done. When Roger came to the table, they hugged. "It's been too long, Roger," Mary said. "George and I and the rest of the family have missed you. We love you, Roger, and nothing Tracy has done will change that." "And I love all of you guys," Roger replied. "I'm sorry to be so distant from you guys." "We understand, son. It's okay, but I have a selfish reason for wanting to see you. Remember Tracy's cousin Bunny, the youngest of her wedding friends, who went into the Air Force shortly after the wedding? Well, she went back to civilian life and just got a job with an aerospace firm in your town. I was hoping you could show her around the city, introduce her to the right people, and just point her in the right direction. Honestly, I'm not asking for anything more than that." Roger smiled crookedly at his former mother-in-law. She feigned surprise. "It was a request for either you or my daughter, and right now neither George nor I take much pleasure in seeing Tracy lead her own life, let alone help someone start a new one." Roger nodded in agreement. Enough said, he thought. A few days later, Roger called Bunny and invited her to lunch at the same restaurant where he had met Mary. He really didn't know what to look for because the last time he'd seen Bunny, she was a thin, blonde-haired, freckled 19-year-old girl getting ready to go into the Air Force. Now she was 36 years old. The only hint Mary had given him was that Bunny no longer had freckles and her hair had darkened. Roger waited attentively as the waiters escorted the 3 lone, brown-haired women to other tables. The 4th brown-haired woman turned out to be Bunny. Roger was more than surprised. She was well built from top to bottom. Roger figured her time in the service had certainly enriched the woman physically, and her sparkling blue eyes would make her a favorite of single men all over town. Roger decided that the dinner had gone well. Bunny had turned out to be very intelligent and more than held up her end of the conversation. Roger reminded himself to call Mary and thank her for putting him in touch with Bunny. Roger enjoyed Bunny's company so much that he invited her over for a second lunch and then dinner and a concert. He definitely needed to thank Mary. Tracy sat at a restaurant table waiting for her beau. In her 43 years, she was still a beautiful woman with a tight, lush body thanks to regular visits to the gym. Her date was a 50-year-old accountant. She was anticipating a pleasant, albeit unassuming, evening. Now she was happily embracing the pleasurable. Since her divorce, Tracy thought her relationship with Joey was heading in a positive direction, perhaps toward marriage. The sex was amazing, and her emotional feelings for Joey continued to grow. However, about a year after the divorce, Tracy noticed that both the sex and emotional attachment to Joey had leveled off. She often wondered if this was due to the fact that sex was no longer illegal. As for the emotional decline, Tracy often thought back to her marriage to Roger. She missed the little things she shared with Roger, the light touches, the sweet nothings he whispered to her after sex and over breakfast. She and Joey often shared time living in each other's apartments. But this sense of intimacy just never came up. Tracy began to suspect that Joey was seeing other girls. The couple hadn't discussed being exclusive, but Tracy assumed it would be after the divorce. When she confirmed that she had caught an STD, Tracy realized that her suspicions were confirmed. "You asshole," Tracy yelled at Joey when she got the confirmation. "I gave up my marriage to a good man for you." Joey couldn't find anything to object. He only smirked across the table. A light went on over Tracy's head. 2 years later, when her STD had long since been cured, Tracy stood up to greet her beau and chastely kissed Fred Myers on the cheek. As she leaned in for the kiss, she noticed that Fred had Frederick Mull aftershave, the same expensive aftershave that Roger always used. She hadn't thought of Roger in half a day. She grinned to herself. Joey certainly enjoyed making love to Roger's wife. She was prettier than most other men's wives, and she was a great lover. So many women just lay around like dead fish. Tracy wasn't one of them. She seemed to enjoy illicit sex as well. Joey noticed that the arousal began to wane when Roger filed for divorce from Tracy, but her emotional dependence on him seemed to grow. At first, Joey enjoyed the intimacy, but then he began to see it as a great burden. After he had been exclusive with Tracy for about 2 years, the itch for other women began to rear its head. He would sneak out with other women from time to time, but since he preferred sex without saddles, he soon caught syphilis. He had no sooner told Tracy than she herself found out that he had passed his problem on to her. She was unhappy about getting the STD and what the disease meant for the couple's relationship. Joey hadn't lost a minute of sleep over his breakup with Tracy. It was a huge party to celebrate Roger and Bunny's 25th wedding anniversary. Roger surprised his wife by renting a party room at their favorite restaurant and inviting friends and family, including the couple's 23-year-old son Daryl and 21-year-old daughter Abigail. No one was surprised by his former mother-in-law's role. 5 years after Roger divorced Tracy, Mary asked him to help his younger cousin Tracy, who was returning to town after serving in the Air Force. Lunch turned into a relationship. Roger learned that Bunny was divorced. "You set me up, Mom," Roger said with a wry grin when he met Mary after learning about Bunny. "It was a really good plan, Mom." Mary smiled broadly and grinned. Roger looked embarrassed. "It wasn't a plan, Roger, I swear," Mary said quietly. "I was only asking you for a favor. There was no way I expected it to last. I knew you'd hardly been seeing each other since the divorce, but I never thought. I can't tell you how happy George and I are. You know, we have always thought highly of you and love Bunny to death. We know you'll do right by this girl just like you always did right by Tracy when you were married." "Whoa, Mom, you're in a bit of a hurry now, aren't you?" "I don't think so, Roger," Mary replied. "You two look great together. She's got your heart, hasn't she? You know me well, Mother. Now suppose it does happen. Who do I call Mom, you or your sister Grace? What about both of us? Grace may deserve the title, but I'd be incredibly hurt if you called me anything else after all these years." Mary was right, Roger admitted to himself. Bunny had his heart, and about 13 months after their first lunch, the couple had bonded in marriage. No, Tracy had not been invited by mutual consent of Bunny and Roger. Mary and George mentioned the neglect only once, which meant they understood. A year later, Roger had his first child, and 2 years later, his second. After each birth, he thanked Bunny with expensive jewelry. Roger and Bunny were on the dance floor 2 hours after the party started. Her head was resting on Roger's shoulder, and she was nestled in his arms when Roger suddenly stopped moving and looked intently into his wife's eyes. He rummaged in his pocket and pulled out a small box that once held a diamond necklace. Roger went back to the jewelry store where he had bought the necklace years ago and exchanged it for a pair of diamond earrings. This time, he was sure he would have the opportunity to give them to his wife. Eventually, Tracy found a man she could grow old with. She was 52 when she married Franklin Jameson, a widower with 2 grown children. She admitted to herself that while Franklin was nothing special, at this point in her life, she probably wouldn't find anyone special, and would be happy with a good man who loved her with all his heart. In her most intimate moments, Tracy admitted to herself that she had left her special man because of her own selfishness and stupidity. She fell in love with Joey's good looks, his youth as a silly schoolgirl. Even though she had 11 good years with Roger, he didn't give her any slack once he found out she was cheating. Who is she kidding? She thought to herself. She was too caught up in the intense feeling she was getting from illicit sex to realize what she was really risking. Her parents loved Roger like family, and tried to get Tracy to see the truth about what she was doing. It took her over 2 years to admit to herself that she was thinking with her head below the belt. Getting an STD was an amazing experience for a woman who thought she was in control. Roger marrying her younger cousin Bunny was a blow to Tracy, especially when she found out that it was her mother who brought them together. "She's family, Mom. How could you do this to me? Set her up with my ex?" "He left me for God's sake," Tracy whimpered. "You deserve to be dumped," Mary shouted at her daughter. "You cheated on him. I'd divorce your ass for that too." "Whose side are you on, Mom?" "You should be on mine, you're my mother." "No, I can't put up with deceit." "I raised you better than that," Mary said quietly. "Roger deserves a good woman, even if she is your cousin." "Why didn't Bunny even invite me?" "She was one of my bridesmaids," Tracy said. "She respected Roger's wishes," Mary said. "I think everyone agreed that his feelings meant a lot more than yours." Given that Roger, Bunny, and Tracy lived in the same town, their paths sometimes crossed. Roger was polite at best when he met with Tracy. The cousins barely did more than glance angrily at each other. Eventually, Joey settled down and got married. His choice of women wasn't what it used to be. His mugging, when he was about 35, had left him with a permanent limp, and his once densely muscled body had degenerated into a loose one. His shorthand seemed to lose its impact on women as his physical condition deteriorated. In his more reflective moments, Joey knew he no longer had the best choice of women when he passed 40. He settled for an average woman with an average body who seemed to really love him. Even when he was straying, women no longer seemed as nice as they had a few years ago. The police questioned Roger and Tracy after Joey was robbed. The detectives were convinced that the robbers had taken too much pleasure in hurting Joey rather than robbing him. As she had suspected, no one had questioned Mary Houston about the attack on Joey. After all, why would the police suspect the sweet gray-haired grandmother Mary guessed correctly? Although she blamed Tracy for her own mess, she knew that Joey was at least partly to blame for the destruction of Roger and Tracy's marriage. So he deserved part of the punishment. Although she hadn't told either Roger or Tracy of her intentions, she figured they would both agree. The end. Subscribe to my channel, thank you.